I thought that before we jump into the Minecraft stuff, I would quickly share a story of a weird problem that I ran into and how tricky troubleshooting was. This might be a lesson in troubleshooting and how difficult it can be sometimes. So recently I've been running into an issue where my internet keeps randomly kicking out. It's very intermittent and it was annoying me for a while. I just assumed that the internet was unreliable, but there's actually more to it than that. So essentially, I didn't really take a lot of time to think about this story, so hopefully I can tell it properly with no preparation. So let's see. Yeah, so the internet kept randomly kicking out, and I didn't know exactly what was going on. I was trying to figure out if there was a specific interval for how often it kicked out, but there wasn't. It was just very random. So I'm trying to investigate this, but because of how intermittent it is, it's very difficult to investigate the problem. So, one thing I eventually noticed was while the internet kicked out on my system, it wasn't kicking out on other systems on the same network. Only my computer was kicking out, not my Intel NUC, which is also hooked up to hardwire. That wasn't kicking out at all, just mine. So I basically eliminated it to my computer specifically because I did try a different cable, an Ethernet cable, because I have hardwire. The exact same thing happened. I'm hooked up to a network switch, so I tried a different port on that. Same thing happened. Even on a port that works on a different computer while it's kicked out. But I tried a different cable. Same thing happens. We determine it's not the cable because it happens on a different cable. I've also tried a completely separate network interface. So my Ethernet that's built into the motherboard could be getting faulty for all I know. So I tried different drivers. None of that made a difference. I tried a completely separate network interface. Same thing happened within that Ethernet too. So it's clearly something with my computer specifically. And based on all this troubleshooting so far, one other thing that's interesting is while the internet's kicked out, the local connection is still working fine. So if I have barriers set up, that still works even when the internet drops out on my system randomly. And it's very intermittent when the internet drops out, but regardless, the local connection still works. So it's not my internet at all like I previously thought it was. So at this point, I think we've determined that it's something specific to my computer since none of my other devices are experiencing this. It's not the cable, it's not the port on the network switch. All of it behaves the same on different ports, different cables, and different network interfaces. It's driving me bonkers at this point. What could possibly be going on? Any of you want to take a guess at what it is before I continue the story? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, at this point, I've determined that it's something specific to my computer and probably software related rather than hardware, like I would originally think. So I looked at my network interface, which has the IP address, subnet mask, gateway, and all those configurations. I had a static IP address, which is fine because, like I said, the internet works most of the time, but it'll occasionally randomly kick out. I've looked at the firewall, completely disabled it. I've ran some virus scans. There's nothing apparent with that. Disabling firewall did not fix the problem either. So what could possibly be going on then? I've updated the Ethernet drivers. That makes no difference. So at this point, I'm thinking, is the system corrupt? Do I need to run a SFC, system file checker command? where you run sfc/scan now, which is common if there's corrupt files in the Windows file system. And then if there is, you also want to run the dism command, which I think is disk image service management or something like that. I forget the abbreviation, but those are commands that you often run if you run into Windows file system corruptions, which can often happen with Windows updates, etc. The sfc command did have some corrupt files, but it was able to fix it on its own. I ran the dism command even though it's not technically necessary. You only need to run the dism if sfc has stuff that it cannot repair on its own. But none of that made any difference either. So then what? Well, I decided to do a clean boot, which is where you basically disable. I also, before this, I actually had an automatic IP address and DNS. Regardless of what DNS I was using, whether it was Cloudflare, Google, or the default one from the ISP, that made no difference, just so you know. So automatic and static makes absolutely no difference with this. It's still intermittent regardless. So I decided to do a clean boot. As a matter of fact, I will mention this. So there's a new chatbot that got released by OpenAI called ChatGPT. You might have all heard it in the tech news. It's all the rage these days, it seems like. But I used that to help me troubleshoot the actual problems, and it gave me ideas for all these different things to test. It's pretty much what I was going to do anyway. But then I decided to do a clean boot, which is basically disabling all your startup programs, whether you do it on a normal boot or safe mode. So I disabled all the startup programs in msconfig, which you could use to configure various things on the computer. I may as well show you guys that right now. That might help paint the picture a little bit. So if I press WinR, which surprisingly is not working, probably because I haven't auto-hot. It's actually frozen. My computer is a little bit slow right now. I guess, not sure why. But to do a clean boot, I went to the Services tab, checked hide all Microsoft services, and I basically disabled everything that's listed there temporarily. I took note of what was already disabled as it was, which was nothing, meaning I could just hit enable all when I'm ready to start again. And then I disabled everything in startup on the task manager as well. And when I disable basically all these services here as well as startup, I discovered that the problem went away. Oh, and one other thing is obviously everything is very intermittent, which makes it difficult to troubleshoot. I can't troubleshoot it unless the problem's actively happening. It took about 3 minutes before the internet came back on, but the local connection was working the entire time. Barrier, etc. worked fine, as well as the SMB network share. That all works perfectly fine because it's all local and doesn't require the internet, just the local network. So let me see. So I disabled all that. I also discovered that if I disable my network interface and re-enable it, that purposely makes the internet drop out. So I was able to willfully make the problem happen. That was a revolutionary discovery because that meant I could troubleshoot it at any time finally. This has bothered me for like 2 weeks, by the way. This is over the course of 2 weeks trying to get this problem solved. I also tried connecting it to Wi-Fi, which Wi-Fi worked if Ethernet worked. So if Ethernet was dropped out, so was Wi-Fi. Meaning like it connected, but the local connection or the internet connection of Wi-Fi is what was glitching out when the Ethernet was glitching out. So it's pretty clear that all my network interfaces are behaving exactly the same. I won't go over every single troubleshooting step I tried, but I tried disabling the Hyper-V adapters and things like that. That didn't make any difference either. But like I said, when I did a clean boot, the problem went away. So the ping command was quite handy when troubleshooting this. So just to iterate, I would go in the command prompt and I would type in ping-t, which will make it run indefinitely with google.com. And that was saying request timed out when the internet kicked out, but I was still able to ping all my local devices. And so when the internet kicked out, the requests would time out, and then this would start working again when the internet came back on, which happened like 3 to 5 minutes after it kicked out. And so basically, when I disable my Ethernet adapter, this would obviously time out, etc., which is what you'd expect. But when I re-enable the adapter, then it would say request timed out until it resolved itself like 3 minutes later, regardless of what settings I had on the adapter. But basically, the reason I bring this up is because when I got the problem fixed, it never did a request timed out when Ethernet came back online. When I enabled and disabled the adapter, then the request timed out just never happened anymore, which was great when I was doing a clean boot. So I'll stop this. So then I started going through one program at a time to identify which program it was. And I won't lie, there were some times when I was doing like 3 or 4 programs at once, which you'd think that would be helpful, but in this case, it was actually making things worse. And so I went through all the programs in the task manager first before I went through all the services. I discovered that it was something in that list of programs on the task manager. Then I went through everything, and when I thought I had pinpointed it to like one of these 1 to 3 items, I did one of those at a time, and it wasn't either one of those that I pinpointed down to. I rebooted every time I made a change to that, which may or may not have been necessary. But I had to go through the list multiple times. Even one at a time, it was still inconsistent. Even though I did every single thing one at a time, it wasn't pinpointing down to one thing, which was very aggravating. I was like, this crap ends tonight. So, going through everything again, and it's not one particular thing. But I'll just give the answer now. I could literally go on for hours probably, but I don't want to do that in this video. So I'll just jump to the answer. Plex Media Server was the thing that was causing it. And the reason why it was so hard to pinpoint down to one thing is because it required 2 reboots to actually fix the computer. So if I disable Plex, you'd think that since that's what's causing it, rebooting would fix it, right? Well, it did not, which is why it was so hard to pinpoint it. I had to actually disable Plex and reboot it twice to get it fixed. Not once, twice. So apparently one reboot isn't enough to pinpoint what's going on. In this case, 2 reboots would have been enough to pinpoint when trying one program at a time. So I basically had Plex disabled, and then I manually started it up, and within 15 seconds the ping command was timing out, and it was always whenever I manually started up Plex. I just tried it out randomly. It was just a random thought that occurred to me, honestly, and then I was like, wait a minute, did that really happen just after I started Plex? So I reboot the computer, it still says request timed out, so I'm thinking, even though Plex is disabled, that not it. Because again, it requires 2 reboots to fix it, not one, even when Plex is disabled the entire time. 2 reboots are required to fix that issue. So then I ruled that out at one point, and then I came back to it as a last resort, pretty much. I was like, is Plex really causing it? Because it was working just fine. I let the ping command run for minutes actually before I started Plex, just to make sure that's what was really happening. And then that's when I discovered I needed 2 reboots to fix the request timed out. So I turn off Plex. The issue still happens for a few minutes at a time, even without Plex running. And then rebooting the computer not once but twice is what makes the ping command work again. The internet doesn't come back until 2 reboots have taken place, not one. I'm sure that if I did like they're the special type of shutdown, I think, like a fast startup, which I think doesn't do a full shutdown exactly. Like some programs can still resume when you normally start up the computer because of fast startup, I think. I was thinking of like disabling that for the sake of troubleshooting, but doing 2 reboots fixed the problem every time. Starting up Plex made the problem kick in 15 seconds later after I started it up every single time. It took 15 seconds for the problem to kick in. So that's what the problem was. It was Plex Media Server, which you'd never guess. Why would that cause problems like this? I don't know why. I just know that now I only run Plex when I need it. And at least now I have control over when it kicks out. I did update it, but it still happens on the latest updates, so there might be something else going on. I'm not sure if the configuration recently changed or what exactly, because months ago, this never happened. This is a pretty new problem. So, yeah, that's hard to troubleshoot because you turn on Plex, it causes the problem, but then you turn it off, the problem's still occurring, so you think it's probably not Plex. But you reboot one more time without making any more changes, which you'd never think to do by default. I mean, why would one reboot not be enough? Well, this is a situation where it wasn't enough. And yeah, there you go. That's what happened. I'm not even gonna bother trying to fix it. I'm just gonna not run Plex at startup and only manually launch it when I need it, which is a bit frustrating, but if I have control over when the problem happens, that's all I'm asking for. So that was very difficult to troubleshoot. I mean, it took a little while to tell the story, but that was like 2 weeks worth of troubleshooting because of how intermittent it was. So if you have Plex Media Server and your internet randomly kicks out, but local connection still works and none of your other devices are affected by this, consider the fact that Plex may be causing it if you have Plex Media Server. So Plex itself works fine even when the internet kicks out because again it's local. But yeah, that's what's going on. If you actually have a solution for fixing Plex and you actually have a solution, you've tried it out yourself and were able to replicate the problem, then let me know in the comments section. Otherwise, it probably won't be very helpful unless you've actually replicated this exact scenario yourself. So, yeah, keep that in mind. So, yeah, I just thought that was an interesting lesson in troubleshooting because I felt like I had no ability while I was doing this. I almost felt like an imposter, and that's a terrible feeling. But when you overcome troubleshooting issues, then all of a sudden you feel like yourself again, if that even makes sense. But yeah, that was hard to troubleshoot. Let's just put it that way. It seems like nobody else has really experienced this as far as I can tell. I haven't specifically searched the Plex stuff, but I couldn't really find any results on that.